It started as a love story, a perfect marriage, a couple who seemed to have it all: trust, laughter, and an unbreakable bond. But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes secrets buried in the past have the power to destroy everything. Meet James and Emily. High school sweethearts turned soulmates. They had built a beautiful life together. From the outside, their marriage was rock solid. They finished each other's sentences, knew each other's coffee orders, and could communicate with just a glance. It was the kind of love story people envied. James was the dependable, kind-hearted husband, the type of man who never forgot an anniversary, always held the door open and called just to say, "I love you." Emily? She was his perfect match, smart, loving, and fiercely loyal. Their love had weathered the years, and with every passing moment, they grew closer. But even the strongest relationships have cracks, and sometimes those cracks are invisible until it's too late. It all started with a simple conversation at a family dinner. James's cousin casually mentioned a genetic trait that supposedly ran in the family, one that James didn't seem to have. It was a small, offhand remark, something that could have been laughed off. But Emily couldn't let it go. She replayed that moment in her mind over and over again. Her curiosity grew into a gnawing suspicion. And before she knew it, she was standing in their bedroom, holding a DNA test kit in trembling hands, about to change both of their lives forever. Emily had never been the kind of woman to doubt her husband. If James said the sky was green, she'd probably believe him without question. That was the kind of trust they had. But something about that family dinner had planted a seed of doubt in her mind. And once doubt takes root, it's hard to make it go away. At first, she tried to ignore it. "It's nothing," she told herself. "I'm overthinking." But every time she looked at James, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, something she didn't know. Her logical side argued that families are complex. Genetics can be unpredictable, but her gut told her otherwise. And as the days passed, her unease turned into quiet obsession. One evening, while scrolling through social media, an ad popped up, an ancestry DNA kit promising to uncover the truth about your heritage. She hesitated for only a moment before clicking Order Now. And that was it. The moment of no return. A week later, the package arrived. Small, unassuming, but to Emily it felt like Pandora's box. She waited until James was asleep, tiptoeing into the bathroom, her heart hammering against her ribs. She swabbed her cheek, sealed the sample, and sent it off, telling herself that it was just for fun, that she wasn't looking for anything specific. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. She was looking for something. And when you go looking for the truth, you better be prepared to find it. Emily had nearly forgotten about the test when the results email finally arrived. It had been weeks since she sent in the sample, and in that time, she had almost convinced herself that she had been paranoid, that she had let a fleeting comment turn into an unnecessary obsession. But as she sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her, she felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. Her fingers trembled as she clicked the link. The loading screen stretched on for what felt like forever. And then, there it was. Her eyes darted over the data, scanning the ancestry breakdown first. No major surprises: European descent, some distant connections to other parts of the world. But that wasn't what she was looking for. She clicked over to the section that listed DNA relatives. Her heart stopped. At the top of the list was a name she didn't recognize. Not a distant cousin, not a long-lost relative. This was labeled as an immediate family match, a person whose genetic markers were undeniably, inescapably linked to James. But it wasn't his parents. It wasn't a sibling she had heard about. It was someone entirely unknown. Confusion swirled in her mind. She double-checked the results as if willing them to change. The name meant nothing to her, but the science was indisputable. This wasn't an error. This person was directly connected to her husband, and yet James had never mentioned them. Her breath caught in her throat as the possibilities flooded in. Was it a sibling James never knew about? An estranged child from before they met? A mistake buried in his past? The room felt smaller, the air heavier. She had sought out the truth, and now it was staring her in the face. But what would she do with it? Emily spent the rest of the day in a daze, carrying the weight of her discovery in silence. Every time she looked at James, she felt like she was seeing a stranger. She wanted to believe there was an explanation, but she also knew there was only one way to get answers. That night, as they sat in bed, she turned to him. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice calmer than she felt. James looked up from his book, raising an eyebrow. "What's up?" She took a deep breath, her hands clenched together. "I took a DNA test." The shift in his expression was almost imperceptible, but Emily caught it. A flicker of something. Surprise? Guilt? Fear? James let out a small, nervous laugh. "Why would you do that?" Emily didn't laugh. She held his gaze. "I just wanted to learn more about my ancestry." She paused. "But I found something I wasn't expecting." James put his book down slowly. "What do you mean?" She pulled up the results on her phone, turning the screen toward him. "Do you know this person?" His face drained of color. His hands, steady just moments before, tightened into fists. The room filled with a suffocating silence. James exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Emily, I—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I don't know what to say." Her heart pounded. "So you do know who they are?" He hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything she needed to know. "Please," she whispered. "Just tell me the truth." James looked down, his jaw tightening. "I have a brother," he finally admitted. His voice was barely above a whisper. "A twin." Emily's breath caught. "A twin? But—" She shook her head. "James, you don't have a twin. Your parents never—" "They never told me," he interrupted. His eyes were glistening, his face a mixture of sorrow and regret. "I didn't know, Emily. I swear to you, I didn't know." Her mind reeled. How is that even possible? James let out a shuddering breath. "I don't know. But if this DNA test is right, it means my entire life has been a lie." Emily sat back, struggling to process his words. She had expected denial, anger, maybe even a confession of some buried secret. But not this. Not an entire hidden past neither of them had known existed. She had searched for the truth, but now that she had it, their world would never be the same.
The days that followed were a whirlwind of confusion, tension, and unanswered questions. James reached out to his parents, demanding an explanation. At first, they brushed it off, claiming the DNA test must have been wrong. But the numbers didn't lie, and when pressed, their carefully constructed story began to crack. His mother broke first. With tears streaming down her face, she admitted the truth, a secret they had buried for decades. James had been born a twin, but his brother was given up for adoption at birth. The revelation hit like a wrecking ball. James sat in the stunned silence, his mind struggling to process the betrayal. The parents he had trusted, the family he had cherished, had lied to him his entire life. Somewhere out there, a brother, a twin, had been living a separate life, completely unaware of his existence. And Emily had been the one to uncover it. At first, she thought the truth would bring them closer. She held James as he grieved the life he never knew he had. She assured him that they would figure this out together, that they would reach out to his brother, that this didn't have to change them. But something had shifted. James was no longer the man she married. He was distant, lost in his own thoughts. Every conversation turned into an argument, every glance filled with unspoken resentment. He stopped laughing. He stopped holding her the way he used to. And then came the accusations. "If you hadn't taken that stupid test, none of this would be happening." She tried to reason with him. "James, I was just curious. I never meant—" "You had no right," he snapped. "You went behind my back. You invaded my life." His words cut deeper than she expected. She had only wanted to find the truth. She had never imagined it would destroy them. The days stretched into weeks, and the divide between them widened. James became obsessed with finding his twin, spending hours online, calling agencies, searching for answers. Emily was left on the sidelines, watching the man she loved unravel before her eyes. One night, as they lay in bed facing opposite directions, she whispered, "Do you still love me?" A long silence. Then finally his quiet, broken voice, "I don't know." That was the moment she knew. Their marriage wasn't just breaking, it was already broken. Emily packed her bags a week later. There were no screaming matches, no dramatic goodbyes, just quiet heartbreak. James barely looked at her as she stood by the door. "So this is it?" he asked. She swallowed back tears. "I don't know how to fix this." He didn't argue. Maybe he felt the same. As she walked out of the house they had built together, she thought about how different things could have been. If she had ignored that nagging suspicion, if she had never taken the test, if she had simply let the past stay buried. But the truth had a way of demanding to be known. And once it was out, there was no going back. The divorce papers came a few months later. They barely spoke after that. Emily still thought about James sometimes. She wondered if he ever found his brother. She wondered if he ever forgave her. She didn't regret searching for the truth. She only regretted that the truth had cost her the man she loved. Before we continue, ask yourself, would you risk everything to uncover the truth? Secrets have power. They can protect, they can destroy, and sometimes they can do both at the same time. For Emily and James, one decision shattered their love beyond repair. But the story doesn't end there. Because after the dust settled, the consequences of that truth lingered, forever changing both of their lives. Months had passed since the divorce, but Emily still felt the ghost of her old life lingering. The empty side of the bed, the untouched coffee mug that used to be his, the way certain songs or places still carried his presence. She had spent so much time questioning if she did the right thing. Would their marriage have survived if she had never taken that test? Could they have lived in ignorance and still been happy? But deep down, she knew the truth wasn't what destroyed them. It was the lies that came before it, the hidden past, the buried deception, the reality that James had spent his whole life living under an illusion. She had only lit the match. The fire had been there all along. James, on the other hand, had thrown himself into the search for his twin. The last she heard, he had found him, a man living across the country, raised in a completely different world, a stranger who shared his DNA, his face, his blood, but none of his memories. She often wondered what that reunion had been like. Did James feel relief, happiness, or just an even deeper sense of loss? As for Emily, she moved on, slowly, painfully. She learned that sometimes love isn't enough to hold two people together, that trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to rebuild, that the past always finds a way to surface, no matter how hard you try to bury it. And most of all, she learned that the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a beautiful lie. So now let me ask you, if you were in Emily's shoes, would you have taken the test? Or would you have let the past stay buried?